December 8, 1941. The attack on the Philippines started on the attack in Hawaii.
During the 2 following weeks, beachheads were successfully secured at 6 points in the archipelago.
December 22, 1941. Japanese troops landed on Lingayen Gulf and advanced across central Luzon towards Manila. So on the date of December 8th up until December 22 on the year 1941, the Japanese was trying to penetrate into Manila. They are now starting to make move to colonize the Philippines. And then at this time, we were still under colonization of the Americans. And so Americans and Filipino troops were the ones who tried to defend the country from Japanese.
As 1941 neared its end, the Japanese were succeeding in closing in on Manila from 2 directions. Japanese plane began bombing Manila in early December. The air attacks continued as they kept on invading ground forces.
December 25, 1941. On the advice of President Quezon, General MacArthur declared Manila an open city and removed the Commonwealth government to Corregidor. January 2, 1942. The Japanese occupied Manila. MacArthur concentrated his troops on Bataan Peninsula to await relief of reinforcements from the United States. After the destruction at Pearl Harbor could never come. The Japanese succeeded in penetrating Bataan's first line of defense, and from Corregidor, MacArthur had no alternative but to organize a slow and desperate retreat down the peninsula.
Some Filipinos helped the Japanese in their propaganda, which is the Asia for Asiatics, but there are some Filipinos who remained unconvinced because they remember the Japanese rule in China and Manchuria.
On the night of March 11, 1942, President Quezon and Vice President Osmeña left Corregidor by submarine to form a government in exile in the United States. General MacArthur escaped Corregidor on PT-41 bound for Australia, 4,000 kilometers away through Japanese-controlled waters. The 76 starving and sick American and Filipino defenders in Bataan surrendered to the Japanese on April 9, 1942. The Japanese left their captives on a cruel and criminal death march, on which 7,000 to 10,000 died or were murdered before arriving to the internment camps 10 days later. The 13,000 survivors on Corregidor surrendered on May 6, 1942.
On this day, General Masahiro Homa, to whom this day was one of the most memorable of his military career. General Homa would have found it hard to believe that this city was with his hands. In April 1942, Corregidor in Manila Bay was the last outpost to resist the Japanese invaders of Luzon. For almost a month, the Japanese bombarded the island fortress with every weapon at their hand. After 24 hours of fighting on the island seas, the Japanese win the fight. On May 6 that afternoon, General Jonathan Wainwright, the American commander, met with General Homa on nearby Bataan Peninsula to effect the surrender. At first, the American commander surrendered only those forces on Corregidor and neighboring islets in Manila Bay, but not the American units still fighting the Japanese elsewhere in the Philippines. Later, however, General Wainwright was forced to surrender all his troops. General Huma, the Beast of Japan, soon set out to visit the scene for the epic battle for the island fortress. The victorious Japanese inspected the area with the interest of the valiant stand by the U.S. 4th Marine Regiment with a mixture of soldier. In the United States, a month later, the Philippine Commonwealth was represented by its president in exile, Manuel Quezon. The first step toward the Philippines' independence, so hopefully planned 7 years earlier in Washington, had received a staggering setback but with the support of the United States.
In year 1942, a lot of things happened. First, it is in this year, June 1942, that schools were reopened with 300,000 students after being closed. It is also in the same year that Military Order Number 2 was been established. It is an order that embodies Japanese educational policies in which it mandated the teaching of Tagalog, Philippine history, and character education. It also emphasizes the love for work and dignity for labor. There was a spread in elementary and vocational education as well. Nippongo was used and the Japanese tried to stop the Filipino people from using the English language. So these are the 6 basic principles of Japanese education. First is they want us to realize the new order and promote friendly relations between Japan and the Philippines to the farthest extent. Second is they want to foster a new Filipino culture based. Third is endeavor to elevate the morals of the people, giving up overemphasis to materialism. Fourth is the diffusion of Japanese language in the Philippines, so they want us to learn their language. Fifth is promotion of vocational education. So they really give emphasis or they give emphasis to vocational education and they want us to have that. And lastly is they want to inspire people with a spirit to love neighbor. So it is one of their principles that we must love our neighbors. On October 14, 1943, a year after the Military Order Number 2 was been established, the Japanese-sponsored republic created the Ministry of Education. An education system during the Japanese period is in relation to the 4 pillars of education. In present time, TESDA is a vocational institution and vocational education that was emphasized during the Japanese era. The Japanese emphasized on showing love to our country and its culture. Learning Tagalog, Philippine history, and character education are still practiced up to this day with little to more changes.